I'm Dan Saltzman. I am a co-chair of the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance along with Sean Lynn Jones. And I want to welcome you to the Warrant Article Forum that we're doing tonight. On behalf of the BNA, the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance, the Brookline Town Meeting Members Association, and the Brookline Interactive Group, thank them for filming this, and the League of Women Voters of Brookline, welcome to the forum. The purpose of tonight's forum is, of course, to educate us and inform us on 5 of the warrant articles that are going to be voted on at the town meeting. First up is Article 8. That's relating to the appropriation of money to study Coolidge Corner Center Street East parking lot. Then next we'll have Article 19. That's Brookline's opposition to the Boston 2024 Olympics bid. Use phone. That's okay. Third will be Article 18. That's asking the Board of Selectmen to study eminent domain powers as they may relate to 2 buffer zones within the Hancock Village property. Then fourth, we have Article 11. That is establishing the Crown and Shield Local Historic District. And then last, but definitely not least, we have Article 12, which addresses the enforcement of snow and ice removal from our sidewalks. So, of course, these are all important articles. They affect our neighborhoods. They affect us all. Some are more controversial than others, but they're worthy of discussion here tonight regardless. I'm excited to learn about them, and I know that you are, and I thank you for coming. So I'd like to introduce Amelia Koch of the League of Women Voters of Brookline, which is she's going to be moderating tonight's event.
Thank you, and thank you all, as he said, for coming. And let's go ahead and start with Article 8, Warrant 8. And we have a total of about 30 minutes for this discussion, and we're going to begin with opening statements by each of the 2 groups, the pro and the con. And we have Paul Sainer and Ann Myers on as part of one team, and then Craig Boland speaking for the other side. And let's begin with Ann Myers and Paul Sainer.
Thank you. Paul and I are here because Cara Bruton couldn't be. She's recuperating from knee surgery, as some of you know. And I am Ann Myers. I co-chair the Economic Development Advisory Board, and I've lived in Precinct 9 for about 38 years, and I spend an enormous amount of time, and have spent an enormous amount of time over the last 38 years in Coolidge Corner. EDAB's charge, just to remind you, is to enhance tax growth from existing and new commercial properties. Commercial properties pay more than residential properties do in town. We do that by aiding the growth of existing businesses and attracting new ones, and by improving the functional and aesthetic qualities of public space in commercial areas. The Center Street lot hasn't been renovated in 50 years, and the DPW has money in the budget to do that. And we started thinking about what new opportunities that renovation might present for Brookline. The Coolidge Corner District Planning work some time ago, and more recently the vibrancy study that EDAB did, identified open space and a public meeting space and an event space as one of the priorities for Coolidge Corner. Is it possible to incorporate such space into the plan for the lot? What should it look like? What functions should it serve? If we're able to add a public space, what would the impacts be on parking now, and how could we mitigate them? What would it all cost? How would we finance the improvements? And are there new revenue opportunities associated with such space? The best way to get answers to these questions is to hire a consultant to work closely with staff and a selectmen's committee with representatives from all the stakeholders, including neighbors, to look at the opportunities that this presents us. The process at the Red Cab site, where a hotel's going up now, was a similar process, and that ended up in a development opportunity. The best way to get the budget requests on the table now is for money to develop conceptual plans only, including cost and revenue estimates for uses such as creating the public plaza that I described, moving some parking potentially from Harvard Street to the lot so that one side of Harvard Street, or even maybe both, the sidewalks could be enlarged and there could be more pedestrian activity, more plantings and other things, more seating on the sidewalks, improving bike access and accommodations for bikes, rationalizing the trash and deliveries in the lot. That's been a difficult problem for many years. Possibly decking the remaining portion of the lot so that no parking spaces are lost during this, and investigating the potential for community solar, and also, because of the timing, it presents an opportunity to look at shared parking with the Devotion School staff and teachers during the construction of the school. all ideas can be on the table. It's up to the Selectmen's Committee and the consultant to decide what will be studied. And I urge town meeting to approve this request so that we can move forward and take advantage of this planning opportunity now and before the lot's rebuilt, so that we don't lose the opportunity for another 50 years.
Thank you. And Paul, did you have any comment as well?
I will defer.
Defer, very good. And then over to you, Craig.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if there are any opponents to this appropriation. This is a little part of the budget for fiscal 2016. You'll find it in item 8 of the, special appropriation 6 of the warrant article itself, and you'll find it in special appropriation 40 of the advisory committee's motion under that article. It's an appropriation that does essentially what Ann said, and it has many, many beneficial purposes. I don't know of anybody so far who's actually opposing this, and I'm certainly not. What some of us would like to see is a slight bit more direction, guidance in the process of doing this. What's going to come before town meeting is a very simple amendment to add 3 words to this particular appropriation, saying, with neighborhood input. I don't think that's going to be controversial. The planning staff already knows that neighborhood input is an essential ingredient of a program like this, and in fact, they've been proactive. They came to the North Brookline Neighborhood Association, and we had a meeting with Cara Bruton that lasted a couple of hours on April 15th. It was very enlightening. One of the enlightenments was an encouragement to take a look at the whole description of this particular thing, and the surprise that came out, which Ann talked about as a decked parking structure, does not appear in the warrant article, does not appear in the advisory committee's vote. Instead, you go poking back into the financial plan for the town of Brookline that came out in February, and you'll find a corresponding description that says, well, we could plan up to a 4-story parking garage in the language that most people would use. I have to say that was kind of a surprise. We tend to think around that part of town that would be a step back into the past to be enlarging parking when the whole drift of the town of Brookline in recent years has been to reduce the amount of parking and reduce the automobile impact that comes with that parking. So we think this is kind of strange, and all we propose to do is to let the town's building construction bylaw apply in its current form and hope for some more neighborhood input.
Very good. Okay, now we're open for questions from the floor, and questions can be up to 1 minute. If the questioners would please come to the mic to state your question, and if you would identify yourself with your name and your precinct.
Thank you, and thank you to the presenters and the people who put the program together tonight. I'm Janie Gilman, Precinct 3. My question really is a broad one. It asks, is this the time to proceed with a study for this one location in Coolidge Corner, absent an overarching study of TDM, of an audit of whether we need any parking? Who knows if we need parking? Smart meters, a parking benefit zone, and other considerations that go along with smart growth. So I'm loath to spend $100 absent a more global approach, in addition to what Craig mentioned about neighborhood input and so forth. I want to be sure we coordinate this with something we hope is coming, a complete streets policy for town, and other best practices in terms of commercial growth and managing parking. Thank you.
So each party at the table has up to 2 minutes to respond to the question, and each side will have an option. And Craig, why don't you begin?
Okay, thank you. You'll find complete streets described in a couple of articles in the Brookline Beacon, an online news site that I edit and have been publishing for about a year now. It's an exciting program. One of the interesting things coming out of that development is the realization that you don't have to win and lose. You can actually have it both ways. There are good examples in the United States and Canada of communities that have put their parking and automobile traffic on a diet, enhanced their pedestrian and their bicycle facilities and their public transit, and found that business revenues go up and tax revenues go up. You don't have to win and lose. You can win and win if you plan right. We happen to be the kind of community that can do this. The communities that tend to win the most are the ones that have dense populations, fairly high incomes, and high educational levels. Hey, that's Brookline.
Very good, okay. Ann and Paul?
One of the components that Ms. Bruton has proposed for the study, Jamie, is a parking utilization component, which I think gets in part to the issue that you raised around how much parking and, in addition, proper parking management through devices like TDM. We have provided to those in attendance tonight a memo from Ms. Bruton dated May 5th, and in that, she talks about the very issue that you raise and points to a number of ongoing initiatives towards trying to determine what the right amount of parking is. Now, the purpose of this study is not parking per se. It's to look at a bunch of different options for the utilization of Center Street and beyond, including Harvard Street. And there are obvious trade-offs between the various component variables of the study. Ultimately, the scope of the study is going to be determined by the Selectmen's Committee and the people that the Selectmen appoint to that committee, including neighbors. I just want to underscore our support for the proposed amendment. Since nothing passes town meeting in terms of land use without strong neighborhood input, as we have seen over the last 6 years or so.
Very good. All right, next question.
Thank you. My name's Leah Cohen. I am a former Coolidge Corner merchant. I am a one-time president of the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association, a past chairman of the board of the Brookline Chamber of Commerce, and a current member of the advisory committee. And what's very important, as I look out on the faces here, I can identify folks who have shopped in my business and many faces who never did. And many local merchants will say, you know, we go to these meetings when we can. We never see these people in our businesses. In order to survive as a Brookline business, as one of your neighborhood businesses that you know and love, we need to bring in people from outside Brookline. My mailing list had people from Wayland, Framingham, Jamaica Plain. My business wouldn't have survived as long as it did without Brookline becoming a destination for people to come in. So a question for you is, do you know what it's like to run a business, a commercial business in a town that's continually over-regulating and overtaxing its commercial base? Thank you.
All right, Ann and Paul, you have the first stab at this question.
I don't personally know what it is like to run such a business, but I've had a lot of experience in commercial areas. I was, for 8 years, the president of the Downtown Crossing Association in downtown Boston, and we spent a lot of time dealing with parking. And I now, as part of my EDAB role, I've been spending a lot of time at the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association meetings every month, and I agree with you. I think that one of the things that makes Brookline a great place to live are the commercial areas, and we need to be able to support the businesses that are there. The Coolidge Theater is expanding, which is another thing that's happening in the lot. That's terrific for town, for Brookline. But people aren't going to go to the Coolidge if they can't park their cars there. The Coolidge can't support itself with just the number of people who live within walking and biking distance of the Coolidge, nor, I believe, can Party Favors and some of the other, Eureka, some of the other magnet stores in Coolidge Corner. And we need that mix of uses in Coolidge Corner, a mix of the kinds of retailers that we want there. One of the reasons, it appears that one of the reasons that there are so many banks is that they don't need parking. And so they're happy to be there even without the parking. But restaurants and other small businesses that might want to open there need the parking to keep going.
I do know what it's like to run a business. I've started 3 of them. I've been in business for the last 30 years of my career. I didn't run a retail business, but I ran a business with plenty of problems and always the need to be creative in how you solve them. I do have a suggestion, though, for the folks who are trying to run those retail businesses in Coolidge Corner, who might like for me to appear more often. Build me a cycle track. I'm an old bicyclist. I also have spent about 30 years as a day-to-day bicycle commuter, and in fact, one of the reasons I moved to the neighborhood where we have lived for 45 years now is that I could ride my bicycle to work. I'd like to ride my bicycle into Coolidge Corner now, but I'm a pretty conservative person when it comes to that, and it's just a little bit too much of a danger for me. I want to see Brookline do something about its bicycle facilities as well as its pedestrian facilities, which I use all the time. So that's an indication of how you get more business. Make it easier for people to get there without driving their cars.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'm David Lashinsky. I think it's precinct 6. I vote every election, but I never pay attention. I know where to go. I'm also the owner and operator of Eureka Puzzles. I'm president of the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association. I've been involved in Coolidge Corner. I actually lived here for about 30 years. What drew me to Coolidge Corner and this area in the beginning was the vibrancy of the commercial, the downtown areas, the choices that we had in terms of being able to walk to the corner, to enjoy what it had to offer, to be able to really spend time here. What I'm looking at right now is a situation where we don't have the sufficient density of population to retain, to stay in business. And it's true not just of me as an individual store owner, but actually it's true of every store owner in Coolidge Corner. Retail trade is going down. There's a huge change in the market. In fact, there's a more disruptive change now that's happened in the past 5 years that's happened in the past 50. Even the large big box stores that came here failed. Barnes & Nobles is gone. Toys R Us is gone. A number of their offshoots are all gone. So the question that I have here is, and by the way, I am, as a resident as well as a shopkeeper, I'm very concerned about the ambiance and the feeling one gets when they come to Coolidge Corner. So the question that I have is this, twofold. Number one is, how are the stakeholders themselves going to be selected? How wide is that stakeholder net? And then question number two is, will there be a component that looks at the density required to support the different businesses? I appreciate the fact that somebody can come to my store with a bike. However, they can't really leave with a bike carrying anything. So people that come with a bike don't leave with very much, which means, from a business perspective, I need more than just a few bikers that come in. Was I clear about my questions?
Yeah, I think so. I think,
Stakeholders and density.
right, thank you very much. And Craig, we'll begin with you.
A great set of issues. The folks of us who come on foot and on a bike may not be able to take as much home, but we come an awful lot more often. The numbers add up. They add up very, very fast. If we come to your store 3 times as often and we only take home half as much, we're still a much better customer You really do need to appeal to the neighborhood. If Coolidge Corner isn't dense enough for you, you're out of luck in New England. Coolidge Corner is the densest urban neighborhood in New England, except for a tiny quarter of downtown Boston. We're not going to get any denser than this. We've had a stable population for about 60 years now. We need to find out how to recruit that population, make it easy and natural for that population to shop in this commercial area, and increase the activity without having to increase the dependence on automobile use and try to turn ourselves into what we're not, a regional shopping center.
So I'll handle the stakeholder piece. If Chair Wasinski were to ask my opinion on how this committee should be populated, I would strongly suggest that we follow a similar pattern to what has worked very well thus far on Fisher Hill, at Red Cab, and at Brookline Place. So it's probably a rather large committee, 11 at a minimum, and it would consist of both professionals and neighbors with stakeholders, as well as merchants with stakeholders. It is important to have professionals on a committee like this, especially since it's Ms. Bruton's intention that the committee actually finalize its recommendation of what the what the scope of the consultant's engagement should be to the Board of Selectmen. I'll ask Ann to deal with density.
Density per se, again, this is a conceptual study to see if we can create open space in the parking lot. And clearly, supporting retail is an important part of this, and one of the reasons that we'd like to do it or see something there is to support the commercial area. I don't know whether density per se and the issues related to maintaining the other issues, the market issues that you were talking about essentially, David, are going to be part of this. It's really up to the committee that's going to do the scope of work, but unless that's important to understanding how the implications of creating this open space, I don't know if that would be on the table or not. But there's certainly other ways that we can approach that, and I think that we should, as maybe it's something that another group can do, or we can continue with a Coolidge Corner Vibrancy Group or something like that to take a look at that.
Thank you. I think we have time for another question or two, so please.
My name is Diana Spiegel, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 2, and I'm on the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance Board. And I wanted to point out one thing. When Craig said you have to go to the financial plan to find out about what's being planned for this budget item, all town meeting members got a copy of the CIP document, the Capital Improvements Plan, and it's described quite well there on page 23. So it's described in detail, I think as much detail as in the financial plan. Ann Myers took the words out of my mouth when she started to talk about the Coolidge Corner Theater, and this is an important draw to Coolidge Corner. People come to go to dinner and to go to a movie and maybe shop in Booksmith, and I think it's just really one of the iconic places in Coolidge Corner. And but it's not just for North Brookline. I feel very lucky. I walk to the Coolidge Corner Theater, but I have friends in South Brookline, and they don't have adequate public transit there. They wish they did. I wish they did. Who knows when that will ever happen? So they can't just take the trolley from South Brookline, and only the most intrepid take their bikes, certainly at night, to go to the Coolidge Corner Theater from near the Baker's School, and nobody's going to walk. So those are all important modes of transportation, but they don't apply to some parts of Brookline when they want to come to North Brookline. So my question is, how we recognize, I'm thinking of Coolidge Corner as a central, not so central maybe, but an important shopping district for all of Brookline. I'm not looking at it to draw people from Lexington, but I think I'd like to see people in South Brookline come north rather than going to Chestnut Hill Mall. So how do we make that happen? And has anybody done any estimates of how much parking a new, almost 200-seat theater, in addition to the already existing auditoriums at the Coolidge Corner Theater, will impact us? So these are all things we'll have to think about, and I don't know if you have any comments.
And we'll begin with Ann and Paul.
I'll go for it. The Coolidge went before town meeting in the spring of 2013, and there was a discussion at that time, as I recall, Diana, about what the incremental parking needs would be. Obviously, there wasn't a specific requirement under the approvals that town meeting provided. I think that the theater recognizes that it would probably be in their best interest to have incremental parking, but that's not something that's a driving component of this study. Quite to the contrary, and contrary to Mr. Boland's April 17th account of the April 15th meeting, the commercial interests are not advocating, generally speaking, for incremental parking in Coolidge Corner. In fact, it was asserted that they want more free parking, and as I pointed out to the advisory committee, the chamber recently did endorse the proposed increase in parking meter fees, which obviously is more expensive as opposed to free parking. So my best answer to your question, Diana, is that I think any urban area that's on mass transit, that's in a high-density area where a lot of people can walk or bike to it, but that has as a vital component of the overall commercial mix destination draws, which primarily are those retailers that are independent that we cherish, will need some amount of parking to attract people from elsewhere in town and frankly from outside of town. So it's a balance that we're seeking.
Craig.
Sometimes it helps to look at places other than Brookline. I would suggest you look at the Brattle Theater in Harvard Square, which is a repertory theater that's managed to get along without a parking garage next door for some time now. I used to love going to it when I was a college student here years ago. I happened to have to walk about a mile to get to the Brattle Theater from where I lived. I walked. Now, that's not quite as far as it would be from South Brookline. I have to own it to you. So there is a problem. I think the problem needs, though, to be solved in a more creative way. We haven't done anything since the Green Line was constructed out of pieces in the 1940s. We haven't done anything significant for public transportation. I watched the Public Transportation Advisory Committee wrestle with this problem this year in terms of the number 51 bus route, and I realized after a while, boy, this is a tough one to solve, because you take a bus route and move it, you may please some people and you're going to make other people angry. It's not an easy problem to solve, and they didn't succeed in solving it so far, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We need to keep exploring more creative and maybe even profound solutions. What does Harvard Square have that Coolidge Corner doesn't? They have a sign on the kiosk, 8 minutes to Park Square. We don't have a subway.
Okay, last question then.
Regina Frawley, town meeting member from 4 miles away in South Brookline, 4 miles to Coolidge Corner, just in case you were wondering. I used to attend quite faithfully the EDAP board for many years, as Ann knows. I'm finding my head spinning because I'm hearing now that we're talking about how we need to have more parking to attract businesses and residents. When about, I don't know what it is now, I'm losing track of time, but 5 or 6 years ago, you had Eleanor White come, who's one of the authors of Smart Growth, talking about how residences should be put in Coolidge Corner because it would discourage parking and cars. The whole idea around Smart Growth is to put it in a major nexus of good lines of communication, transportation, so that they don't need a car. So my head is spinning because I don't understand which direction you're really coming from, number one, and if things have changed while I wasn't looking, and that's always possible. Last I knew, the two big garages have not yet had a plan for how they're going to be developed. Unless that's happened to drive the town to want the taxpayer to somehow provide the parking for other businesses like that, I don't know about it. Can you tell me what has changed in the last few years that wasn't when you had the Coolidge Corner District Planning Council? Can you tell me what's changed in the meantime?
And actually, we're going to start with Craig this time.
Okay.
Okay. This is really a question for Ann. This is right up her line. She's the gal who pays close attention day by day to these issues. Us residents are likely to see things only in a broader timescale. All I can see is that businesses have come and gone and businesses have come and gone. The worst two times that I have seen were the very sharp recession of 1974. We had so many vacancies in the business areas around Coolidge Corner, and not just Coolidge Corner, but the satellite areas too, that I was actively involved in trying to solicit somebody who could come in and do a reasonable scale development and restore some of the vitality that we lost. We did not succeed in putting the right ingredients together at that time. The other change was the recent recession that we had starting in 2007, 2008. There were a surprising number of vacancies. We are up to at least 20 vacancies at one point, although we did seem to get fairly rapid replacements. So even those of us who aren't involved the way Ann would be in the day-to-day workings of this see that we have a commercial area that isn't totally insulated against the large-scale economy, and we need to be doing what we can to support it. We may differ a little bit in how we would like to go about supporting it, but we don't differ that much in seeing that as an important community objective.
Up to 2 minutes, Ann.
Okay, nothing's changed. Again, this is a conceptual study. The DPW is going to do the lot sometime. We'd love it if we could think about how it should be done before they go and repave it and put the curbing back exactly where it is and make it look like a new version of what's there. That's what started us thinking about all of this in the first place, the fact that the lot was going to be redone. Everybody has been clamoring for some open space in Coolidge Corner. This may be a terrific opportunity to create some. And on the back of the memo that was handed out, there's some sketches of a space essentially behind CVS. It's a pretty significant space that you could get big enough to move the farmer's market across the street, which a lot of people have been trying to figure out how to do. And we could have music there, all kinds of things. You could have a place to sit and eat a sandwich outside, which is hard to find right now in Coolidge Corner. But if we do that, the only way to do it is to take a number of existing parking spaces, and you have to put them somewhere. We are assuming that we can't afford to lose half of the lot, half of the parking spaces in the lot. Maybe the committee wants to change that assumption, but I'm making that assumption. And so that's why you need to have a deck or something to have the same number of spaces, maybe a couple more, maybe a couple fewer if you move some spaces from Harvard Street and expand the sidewalk, if that becomes a priority. But we're not talking about lots of new parking spaces. This is not a parking study. This is an open space study.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, now we have a few minutes for closing remarks, and let's say 2 minutes each side, and
So did you close the
I
public questions?
did. We're past time. Shall we allow one more? I'm inclined to, please. Yes, one more question, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. So my name's Bob Miller. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 8. And I wanted to say that I think that there's a lot more that we all have in common than dissimilar. And I absolutely applaud, open space in Coolidge Corner. Absolutely, we need it. I mean, it would be even terrific if it was a venue where people could, performances could occur. I teach at one of the public schools here. Maybe kids could, do performances. I mean, there's lots and lots of things we could think of to do. So that's wonderful. I think we all would love to have wider sidewalks and maybe some seating and cafe opportunities in Coolidge Corner, bicycling, walking, all of that. Basically, my question, and I think in part Ann may have already partially answered, but whether this study has the opportunity for really taking a broad look. And the two things that I was going to ask about is, number one, does the study allow for looking at the impact of additional cars in Coolidge Corner? Because it's not just a matter of parking cars, it's also a matter of getting them there. And anybody who's been in Coolidge Corner on outbound Beacon Street at 5:30 or so in the afternoon, you know that it's not just a matter of parking the cars, it's a matter of getting them there. And the other thing is, is the Chamber of Commerce maybe going to be invited to get involved? Because maybe a shuttle bus that's at part sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce that runs between Washington Square and Coolidge Corner and Brookline Village, might solve all sorts of problems in terms of people who are coming from outside the area, but then can go all around Brookline and shop in many areas without having to keep looking for more parking. So anyway, I guess my overall feeling is, I'm hoping that we're not going into this with any, we shouldn't assume we need a decked garage, and we shouldn't assume we don't need a decked garage. We should look at what, I think it's terrific to do a study, and I hope that we'll welcome whatever we hear.
Very good, thank you. And we'll begin the responses with Ann and Paul.
The study isn't scoped yet. The committee that's going to be assigned, as Paul described, the Selectmen's Committee, will work with the staff on a scope of work. I assume the examples Paul mentioned on Red Cab and some of the other development projects where there were Selectmen's committees of this kind are all open meetings. So everybody can have input into the study, and there will be community meetings throughout or public meetings that the committee has throughout the course of the study. And it will be a multidisciplinary study. We imagine, one of the ideas that a lot of people have wanted to explore here is the use of solar panels, for community solar panels. You need a solar expert to be on the team. Obviously, we need landscape people. We need someone who understands transportation. It's going to be a multidisciplinary team of people. And we do have some data from we did an intercept study last year of shoppers in Coolidge Corner, both online and actually intercepting, doing surveys on the street. And so we have data of, and I don't have it off the top of my head, it is on the EDAB website, the breakdown of the people who drive and who come from other places versus the people who walk. So there is some of that data already. Again, we're not talking about increasing the number of cars, so we shouldn't assume necessarily that there are going to be more cars and more traffic. And yes, certainly the chamber can be involved. Again, it's going to be an open public process, as all of these are, and I expect that they will be actively involved.
Very good.
Thanks. I'm going to let this be my wind-up speech, if you don't mind.
I don't object
I
at all.
see the hours is advancing. Bob's given us quite a laundry list of questions. I don't think I could possibly address them all, but a couple of them. There is going to be environmental consideration in this by necessity. Article 3.7, the building construction bylaw of Brookline, says that when you're doing something where you include a structure of any sort as part of your consideration, you have to go through a four-step procedure. The study that's being done now, a conceptual study, would qualify as the first of those steps because it's developing a program for what to do. That's exactly what the bylaw calls for. There is a stipulation, though, that was added about, I think, 7 years ago. It says when you do a study of this type nowadays, you can't just focus on the objectives you would like. You also have to do environmental analysis, and you have to consider the sustainability of this project. So these ingredients are going to factor in this study too, It's not a study that can just be done in a totally open-ended fashion by saying, well, I only want what I want, and I'm going to ignore anything else. You're going to have to make amends to what the bylaw now requires. That, I think, is the basic protection that those of us who were initially concerned about this appropriation were looking for, and we came to realize we already have it. It's already on the books of the town, and it has been in more or less the current form since 1975. So I don't think that that's going to be such a great problem. It's just that it might not have occurred to people that when they said a parking structure was part of the things they were going to study, they were buying into a process that the town set up to guide the efforts that concern what you do when you propose to build or alter a town structure.
All right, so you have your choice. You can combine your closing remarks with your responses here, or you can have a few minutes later for closing remarks. And please.
Yeah, Paul's going to close.
All right. So in summary, I'd like to just point out the historical genesis of this proposed study. It goes beyond what we've already referenced today, meaning the 2013 CIP that had a significant amount of money to re-asphalt this lot as is. It certainly goes beyond the 2013 Coolidge Corner Theater proposals to the town. That certainly got town meeting members taking a close look at the Center Street lot, and I think a number of us came away with a sense that there was sort of disorganized confusion around some of the components of the existing conditions. But the real roots of this goes back to the vibrancy report. And I just want to mention that once economic development completed its 5-year plan in 2012, we were approached by a number of merchants who, building on what David said, were very concerned about future trends in our downtown area. And there was a meeting, it's a matter of public record, that Kara attended regarding open space on September 8th, 2013, at which Sean Lynn Jones and Carla Benka and Gene Stringham and also Frank Carroll were present. And there was a suggestion that we should build on one of the clear recommendations in the vibrancy study around trying to determine if there might be a capability of having an open space gathering component in our downtown area. It's as simple as that. This is not something that EDAB has been driving. It's a natural extension of our 5-year plan and a very, very thoughtful vibrancy study that we're grateful for the BNA's participation with. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you. So we have 4 more articles to be discussed tonight, and as there are not 2 sides on any of the remaining articles, we'll have presentations of up to 15 minutes and then questions. And we'll begin with Article 19. If the person speaking to Article 19 could come forward to the mic, that would be excellent, actually. So we welcome Lee Birnbaum, and Lee, you have up to 15 minutes to describe the article.
Sure. And
if you would please just keep an eye on Lee, she'll help you keep on time.
Sure. And I probably take quite a bit less than 15 minutes on the opening here. So Warrant Article 19 is a non-binding resolution seeking to ask town meeting to oppose the Boston 2024 effort that's happening to bring the Olympics to the, as they say, the city of Boston, but as we know, the entire metropolitan area, and indeed to urge our other elected officials who represent us at the state level to do the same. I know that this has been a topic that's been pretty heavily in the news everywhere, and there's been a lot of discussion on the financial reasons and the housing reasons and the management concerns, all related to Boston 2024. And I can answer some of those questions if you have any during the question time, but I'll note that the advisory committee itself wrote a very, very good report covering a lot of that. And so to the degree that you all are familiar with those, we can leave it to there. I wanted to spend tonight's opportunity to speak a little bit about the Brookline-specific aspects of the Boston 2024 proposal, because it's not something that's gotten coverage, from the Globe or on radio or in some of the other angry missives that are available online. So in the proposal that was submitted to the USOC, the U.S. Olympic Committee in January, there are two events that will directly impact Brookline. They have nominated the Country Club as the home for the golf event, and the proposed marathon route is expected to run through Brookline, though not following the Boston Marathon route in general. I'll note that on the map, I believe they did not even label Brookline as Brookline, but it does have the course running right down Route 9 through town. I'll also note that, as those of us who live in North Brookline know, we're surrounded pretty heavily by a lot of Boston neighborhoods, and Boston University, of course, just right across the street, is slated to host badminton and potentially hockey. And for those of us who have reason to travel into Cambridge ever, especially along the 66 bus, the Lower Alston is slated to host aquatics, hockey, tennis, fencing, and water polo. So that's a lot of Olympic activity happening both within our town borders and just outside, and in corridors that are very important to those of us who live in Brookline. All of that is reason to ask a lot of good questions about planning and about finances and about what it means for the state and what it means for the town budget when it comes to overtime and DPW time and these types of things. But I'd also like to point out that regardless of what you think about the merit of Boston 2024 inherently, there's a lot of other concerns about the way that the process has happened and the way that we've gotten to where we are today that I think are reasons for the town to that even those who may be in favor of an Olympics conceptually to consider thinking again. I would say that Boston 2024 is at best indifferent to the town of Brookline, and potentially a lot worse. I'll point out that no one is here tonight from Boston 2024. No one from Boston 2024 came to the advisory committee meeting. Nobody from Boston 2024 came to the Board of Selectmen meeting, even when the Board of Selectmen agreed to delay their vote on the hope of hearing from the committee. Even still, no one attended. They have scheduled a variety of public meetings across both the neighborhoods of Boston and then also across the region. Both two sets, one to solicit feedback and another to build support among those who are in support of it. None of those meetings have been scheduled for Brookline, despite the intent to house two events here. And even when it comes to coordinating with the town for those that they claim are on their side, in the same Board of Selectmen meeting that they did not show up to, the folks from the Country Club were there to talk about hosting the U.S. Open PGA event, and based on the reporting, as I was unable to be at that meeting, there were a couple of accounts of questions that were asked to folks from the Country Club about the relationship between hosting the U.S. Open and hosting the Olympics, where they mentioned that they had been contacted about a year ago by Boston 2024, but discovered that they were in the plan the same time the rest of us did when those bid documents were released, and that there's been no follow-up despite the fact that they have promised to the USOC that that is indeed where they will house the event. These are all concerning things from the perspective of Brookline. We've been largely ignored, and it brings a lot of concerns about the way that the Olympics would be handled in town were it to come. There are other aspects to hosting the Olympics that I think are troublesome. The Warrant article brings up some of them around security, around the displacement of philanthropic activity and distraction on events. This is 15 minutes that we could all be spending on something else were it not for the Olympics, and that that amount of time and attention is just going to grow over the 9 years if we do get it. But there's some very specific things that the IOC requires of host communities, and given the hosting of events within our town borders, there's every reason to believe that they will require them of us. For example, they require that all outside advertising, which is to say billboards and the like, would be turned over to the IOC for them to manage and sell the ad space on, and also to ensure, as they call it, no guerrilla marketing happens for any sponsors who are not Olympic sponsors. And that includes all public billboards, including any that may be town-owned. They require that host communities not have any other major events within some number of weeks of the Olympics, which then means that the town's calendar is handed over to the IOC. Security restrictions, as you can imagine, are pretty severe. If you want to go to the extreme end of it, London, housed anti-aircraft missiles on the roofs of apartment buildings. And of course, significant traffic restrictions, not just from the additional people brought into town for the event, but mandated set of Olympic lanes to transport athletes and dignitaries around, and exclusively for their use. Those are all things that would apply within our borders, no matter what Boston does, and they're things that I find troubling at best. I know that as a town we host the marathon, obviously, with every year. The Ryder Cup has been here, and the World Series has been here a few times recently, just outside of our borders. But Boston 2024 isn't one of those events. It's all of those events for 3 weeks on our dime, and largely for the benefit of people who don't live here. And those are my general comments. I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
And if you would identify yourself, please.
Hi, I'm David Aronson. I'm a new town meeting member, Precinct 3. I was interested in this. I saw the warrant article. I have a number of, I suppose, complaints about the way this is being done. Firstly, I agree wholeheartedly that the process by which Boston 2024 came to us was not handled properly. Having said that, I believe that we're also sort of doing a knee-jerk reaction to a process that has yet to come to fruition. You pointed out correctly that we haven't heard from Boston 2024 despite their using us. But I'm concerned that, I looked at the social cost thing here, and I find it that somehow our local charities won't be taken care of because of the Olympics. I find that, I guess, difficult to fathom as a reaction to it. I think that it would not hurt this town to wait to find out more before we go ahead and make a non-binding or even binding resolution. There are many things left to be spelled out. So I guess I would be, I'd be not in favor of this warrant article because I think it locks, well, non-binding. It says to the world, to Boston 24, that it's a NIMBY, not in my backyard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. On the two major points there regarding charity, the budget for Boston 2024 requires that they solicit a large amount of philanthropic donations. They claim to have lined up a variety of local businesses, though most of that hasn't been released. Those are funds that couldn't be spent on other things, and to the degree that those are businesses who choose to self-interestedly support arts or sports or anything of that ilk, that is a part of their charity budget that is going to go elsewhere, or that cannot go elsewhere. To the argument that it is too early, I think that is something that the Boston 2024 has said a lot. However, their application is due to the IOC this fall. So there's a lot of things that are going to begin to be set in stone very quickly. And the fact that they haven't been able to give us detailed plans on what they're going to do or what they're going to change, I think brings what is a legitimate concern that really we're going to be told that it's too early until it is too late.
Thank you very much. There being no more questions, we thank you for your presentation. And we invite Regina Frawley
Thank you all.
to present on Article 18.
Hi, Regina Frawley from South Brookline, the place I sometimes call the forgotten corner of Brookline. We have very little there. We have a tiny shopping area that doesn't have a supermarket. You have to drive at least a mile and a half to the nearest one, and so on and so forth. So this is a very important issue here, and I'm asking the Board of Selectmen to study and consider taking of the 2 green spaces abutting Russet Road and Beverly Road and the 2 village-designed apartments at Hancock Village. It would be called a taking by eminent domain, which is less than 400 years old. It's a European concept. It was devised in the middle of the greatest war probably on European soil, if it's to believe. 75% of the citizens in 30 years were killed. And it was a way to help mitigate that kind of revenge. And what did it do? It required that you could only take somebody else's land for a public purpose, and you had to give them the full fair value for their land. In 1791, the United States thought that was a good idea, and in the Bill of Rights and the Fifth Amendment, we incorporated it. We've used it many times in Brookline, and the most notable being the B2 and the farm, the marsh and the farm in 1958, which is where the Brookhouse is, as well as where the current development going on at the B2s. We've also taken it for 50 Pleasant Street for public housing in 1963, and around the same time we took the old incinerator site and the landfill in Lost Pond over in Chestnut Hill. How do you implement eminent domain? The Board of Selectmen would study it. They'd put together a committee of staff experts with expertise in finance, bonding, eminent domain, and real estate assessment. Town council would probably be the eminent domain expert by then. You also use consultants as needed. You're going to need to know how much the land is valued for, et cetera, and bonding experts. This is how it's been done in some of the cases that I just already told you happened in the early 60s. Now, what am I looking at in my wonderful precinct 16? We have all those green spaces there, but each one has a problem. First of all, I'm looking for active recreation space. That's the most important thing we don't have in South Brookline. So I looked at Walnut Hill Cemetery with the help of the town planning staff, open space staff who identified the public spaces for me. I think it's inappropriate to have active recreation space in the cemetery. I looked at public Potterham Library, which has an adorable little pocket park there, but not big enough for equipment. I looked at Baker School, and as exactly the same as every school in Brookline, the school is primarily, the recreation space is used for the students, and with a population of over 800 at Baker School right now, it's in use for recess pretty much all day long. And I know I've lived in my home for almost 50 years, and I used to have to leave even when the population at the school was half that. We had to leave when the children came out for recess. So then I looked at the horse sanctuary, which is a natural conservation. You can't touch it. It's protected by conservation law. And that left one other recognized publicly owned space by the town of Brookline. It's called the Potterham Circle Rotary, and I don't think I should have to defend why you shouldn't be playing actively out there. Doesn't even have a bench for passive sitting, but it's about the only thing you can do when you take your life in your hand trying to get to it. So I then looked at private space in South Brookline in my precinct. I looked at the Rock Quarry, which has a paper street that's never been developed, and my daughter and all her friends used to play out there and come home with stitches, needing cuts and all that, but they had a great time, but it's too problematic to develop. And I spoke to town officials about Bournewood Hospital. Would it be possible to buy an acre there to put an active recreation space with equipment there? And I was told the one thing that Bournewood and the neighborhood has always agreed on, in the midst of variables they don't agree on, is that they didn't want to mix the two populations. The population patients from Bournewood and the neighborhood patients is frequently about liability. And I understand that. I tried to open a food pantry at Bournewood, and that was the only issue. They would otherwise be happy except for the liability issue. So that left me with Hancock Village, the only possible green space remaining in my precinct with over a mile walkability to any other space, over a mile. We're the only precinct in the whole town that doesn't have walkability to active recreation space, and that is a quote from Erin Shute, the open space director in Brookline. It's about 6.5 acres. If you look at this map, you will see some circles up there. Back in 1946, when they designed it, in order to get it approved, they made a wonderful agreement with the town of Brookline, and they said that no more than 20% of the land would ever be built with any form of housing. They quickly followed it up with those red circles, and those red circles are playground equipment. And if you look to the extreme right, that's an aerial view, those three are on the green space I'm talking about, and those are all 3 playground areas that were there, at least behind my property, through the early 60s, where there was a merry-go-round there and a sandbox, according to residents who had their children there. I bought my home in 68. They were down by then. So there's another way to look at it, the red outline. And just to give a perspective, the, undulation of those on the left side are the apartment complexes. They're all a garden setup. If you look at the, and I hope I can use this correctly, way over here, this skinny line, this is the green space we're talking about. So you see, it's not about a big space in width. Some of the space is only 30 feet wide, and some is a little over 100 feet wide. It's very undulating. So at the time, the news accounts have verified the understanding that I was told when I bought my home. There was to be a permanent buffer strip between the houses on Russet and Beverly and the apartment complex, which is an M zone. Back then, as I've been told by one of the selectmen, you had to have, at a certain point, you had to put a zoning on every piece of land in the state. And so they put S7 on the buffer zone. It was arbitrary. It was a 100% single house project. Single house means one doorway, oh my. With natural screen and the buffer strip, I was told I'd have 15 minutes. Now planned for Hancock Development. Here we go, I'm gonna have to fast talk. In a memo from John Hancock itself in 1946, it said there would be a 125-foot park as shown as the buffer zone, which protects our development from anything that might be built on the other side. So it's mutually protective. It was reaffirmed in the 50s when they tried to put parking out there. It was turned down, and I think it was also offered in 2006 and turned down again. The community was very happy to have it because it was patriotic. It was for the returning vets. For 70 years, these two green spaces have been recognized for use as a park. It has the 5 areas I told you about: soccer, the merry-go-rounds, football, bicycling, skating, and cross-country skiing just this past winter. Herb Schillick, who was for 25 years a member of the planning board, said when he bought his home on Woodcliff Road, he was promised that was restricted land that could never be built on. I was told the same, and several of my neighbors were. Commitment from Brookline has been consistent, and I'll quote from the Green Space Alliance, the chair of the Park and Rec. With the increasing number of children, we have an even greater need for green space and play areas. We're now at a crucial point in deciding the future level of service we can provide in our parks. It would be a travesty to deprive our children, and so on and so forth. In 1871, the town demonstrated its commitment to open space when it bought two areas, Cypress Field being one of them. And it's restricted to those bottom functions and not otherwise, it wrote. How do you finance it? This is the big issue that some people raise. They're entitled to their full and fair market value. You do it by state grants, you do it by raising bonds, which is how we buy just about everything public. And I'd say philanthropy. We have recently on the globe, they said there's over 300 millionaires in Brooklyn. I want to find one of them. I think we can do that. In the fiscal year, capital improvement for 16 to 21 fiscal year, it says we have 14 individual park projects totaling $15.5 million over the next 6 years. It also has additional $4.3 million in other parks open space accounts. There are possibilities for funding this. This is our state rep, Ed Carpenter, who will zealously seek state funding as well as federal funding. It's great for the environmental issues, stormwater storage, etc., habitat, wildlife. The advisory committee has supported it with only one vote against it, and all these other committees, no other votes are against it. Preservation, climate action, and Brookline PACs. Conclusion. There were promises in the 1946 agreement. There is a question of equity. Why should my constituents, I'm past having children there, but why should the people coming not have a place for a safe place for their active recreation? It's criminal that we have to walk over to West Roxbury, and that's what they do. We've always used it for recreation, so there's past practice. I think there's even a case for easement. And finally, and not least, it's the last chance we're ever going to have. When it's gone, there's not another place in South Brookline ever. It's gone. So what are we talking about? Lest we forget, take a look at what this beautiful land is all about. You can't see the ski trails on the snow, but that's what was there when those pictures were taken. There's stormwater showing in the upper left, and the bottom was an outdoor movie that was presented, I assume last year, whoever took the picture. And that pretty much says it.
So if there are any questions, would you
Any
please
questions, please?
step up to the mic? No, not a question. Thank you, Regina. All right. Next, we have Article 11.
Well, then, please allow me to say thank you.
You're welcome. And now we have Article 11, and Barbara Scotto, are you here? There we go. Very good. Yes, please. Absolutely. Regina, take your sign. Your sign. Your sign. Would you take your name?
Your name tag.
Thanks. That was more excitement than I'd hoped for. All right. So between the two of you, you have 15 minutes to describe Article 11.
Thank you. We're very happy to be here tonight describing this article because it's something we're very excited about. I'm Barbara Scotto. I live on Crown and Shield Road. This is Bob Miller. He lives on Copley, right?
Yes.
I know where he lives. I just get the names of the streets mixed up. We live in a neighborhood that is very close to Commonwealth Avenue. It's really, it borders, it's close, very close to BU is what I really want to say. And it is a neighborhood that has always been vulnerable. We, all along Commonwealth Avenue, and you'll recognize this, we have Firestone, we have Sullivan Tire, we have Enterprise Car Rental. So there are these businesses that back up to the houses on Adams Street. If you continue down Commonwealth Avenue, you come to Pleasant Street, and if you turn right on Pleasant Street, you will realize that, again, on the opposite part of opposite part of Pleasant Street, there's a big BU building that's on Commonwealth Avenue, and then we get to the housing that, in fact, Regina mentioned, the public housing along Pleasant Street. Then we get to some regular apartment buildings, not buildings, but they're the old-fashioned walk-ups. And then we get to Dexter Park. Dexter Park abuts, it's diagonally across the corner from the edge of this district. The St. Aidan's 40B development is at the other end of our neighborhood. And if you go over onto Babcock Street, it's a local historic district until it comes to the Arbor Psychiatric Hospital, which also backs up to our neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that has multiple pressures because of the kind of development around it. We had talked in our neighborhood for quite a while about a local historic district and had done nothing about it because we just hadn't. You know, it's one of those things that you talk about and you don't do anything about. And recently, one of the properties at the end of the neighborhood was bought for 40B. And I think that was a wake-up call for us, because what we realized is the people living in the neighborhood valued this neighborhood greatly. We loved living there. It's the most convenient neighborhood imaginable. You can be in downtown Boston very quickly. You can be in Coolidge Corner. It's an interesting neighborhood. But it is a vulnerable neighborhood. So one of the properties was bought for a 40B. And there were several other properties that were bought by absentee owners for investment reasons. And that was of great concern to us. One of the houses has stood vacant for, I think, at least a year because they're asking such high rental for it. There's no one living there. There's another property where someone was trying to rent out individual rooms, which was in violation of the more than three unrelated people living together. So there have been all kinds of pressures. And this neighborhood has actively worked to maintain its integrity. Everything from working with the 40B that went onto the St. Aidan's property, where in fact they originally wanted to put up a 140 or 150 unit apartment building. And we have what is now quite a lovely development there, where we managed to save the old tree and so forth. Our issue in the neighborhood is that we feel strongly about the community. We love where we live. We want people to buy into it who appreciate what it is. It is an architecturally significant neighborhood, according to the Preservation Commission, and we certainly believe that. People have maintained their homes in ways that are quite appropriate to the development. I mean, you drive through and you don't see people who have modernized their houses in ways that take away from their architectural integrity. So by proposing a local historic district, we are, as much as anything, making a statement about what our values are and what we hope people who move into the neighborhood will share with us. We will not stop the 40B by having a local historic district. A local historic district does not stop demolition of a property. We are very sorry about that. The house that will be developed is kind of the cornerstone of the neighborhood at one end. It is an architecturally significant house, But I think that it wouldn't have mattered had we done this 10 years ago, because this 40B is allowed to demolish houses after a demolition delay. Bob will talk a little bit about how we managed to get this article to town meeting, so.
So I'll just briefly run through the process. And I want to reiterate what Barbara said about that this is, even though the timing was triggered by this particular 40B, it's something that's been talked about for a long time, including when the St. Aidan's Church was sold by the Archdiocese of Boston. So it's something that's been on people's mind for a long time in the neighborhood, and you know, it's important to us that this is not seen as just a knee-jerk reaction. And the boards that we've gone before, the Preservation Commission, the Selectmen, the Advisory, have, you know, we've been complimented repeatedly on, you know, what a together neighborhood we have, how quickly and efficiently we presented our case. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this was not something that just came to our minds at the end of last year when this 21 Crown and Shield got sold and a 40B came up as a possibility. And as Barbara said, you know, we're not under the misunderstanding that we're going to be able to stop that 40B. But there are a lot of reasons why it's been successful. Why it would be an important piece of our neighborhood. And we've had, you know, very widespread support from the neighbors, which is another reason why we've been able to move so quickly. We've had quite a few meetings in the neighborhood. We had a meeting which we held at the library, and you know, as well as going before the Board of Selectmen, the Advisory Committee, and a number of times in front of the Preservation Commission. So, you know, basically we feel like it's been an open process. I believe we have about 86% of the neighbors who have signed a document stating that they would like to be part of a local historic district. You know, which not only is that high, but, you know, there are a number of properties who we've just been unable to get a response from the owners. A couple of the properties are owned by Chinese investors, and we just haven't gotten responses to either mailings or emails. So we feel like it's been a pretty transparent process, an open process, and something that the neighborhood is very much aware of what we're going into.
Very good. Are there any questions for the presenters? All right, there being no questions, we thank you.
Thank you.
And we invite Regina Frawley. I have her listed a second time. Snow and ice removal. Sorry. Oh, that's Stanley. Stanley, I'm delighted to invite you to the mic to speak. Okay. Yeah, please come up and sit down, and let's hear from you on the subject of snow and ice removal.
Oh, yes. Hi, thank you so very much. Stanley Spiegel, and I'm the author of a compromise resolution which is being put forward under Article 12, if I'm remembering the article correctly, which deals with snow and ice removal. The warrant article was the result of a task force that Town Administrator Mel Kleckner put forward to deal with issues involving safe passage on sidewalks and so on when there's snow and ice. And they came up with a warrant article which has much to recommend it, but was also controversial in parts. And what I, along with Dennis Dowdy, who was on this task force, did was extract a couple of parts from the article which we felt would be non-controversial and could be passed at this town meeting, whereas the rest of the article might go back for some reworking. This way, we'd have something in place for the coming winter, which is important to us, and it have not the entire article be bogged down by sending it off to a study. So the two parts which we'll be asking town meeting to approve, one is to increase the fine structure. The fines had not been increased since 1987, which was when I, along with Marty Rosenthal, co-authored the bylaw, which is now in place and has practically not been changed in the last almost 30 years. So the fines are being increased to the levels that the task force wished them to be, with one exception, which I'll get to in a moment. The other part, which is also non-controversial, is to give the Commissioner of Public Works the opportunity to hold off on enforcement for a day or two or whatever, depending on the severity of a storm, and to announce via the town website and other social media to people to know that they don't have to come in and clear sidewalks in commercial areas or elsewhere if it's impossible for them to come in and do so because of the severity of the storm, of which we had several last winter. So my hope is that those two parts, which so far appear to be non-controversial, will be adopted by town meeting. Let me just briefly say what some of the problems with the other parts, which should go back for further study, I believe. In any event, I don't believe they'll come to this town meeting. One problem is that the task force recommended no warning at all for homeowners, which is what the current bylaw grants homeowners. And many homeowners, many of us, felt that this is something which we should continue each year. There are new people moving into town, they're not aware of the regulation. Give people a warning and then begin fining them. Another thing that the article talked about, the wording of the warning article, talked about looking at past performance. In other words, if you were what somebody called a chronic offender, you wouldn't get any warning at all and you'd be fined immediately and to the highest level. I don't think we should do that in this town, at least that's my opinion. Chronic offender, level 2 offender, level 3 offender, didn't make a lot of sense. Maybe that's what we want to do in this town, but it certainly was a controversial provision whether we want to have this look-back period. I believe in redemption. Each year is a new year, give them a warning, and let's take it from there. But at least it's controversial, and we just declined to advance that. Another part was each day is a separate offense, and that's been, for the moment at least, rejected. A very brief anecdote, when my wife and I went to California to see our new grandchild in early February, the day before we got an email telling us that our snow removal people were not going to be doing it anymore. We scrambled, we found somebody else, but if we hadn't gotten that email and then a monstrous storm hit, which it did, we would have come back with about $1,000 in fines because there would have been no warning. Each day would have been a new offense. We wouldn't have known that the sidewalks weren't being cleared, and we would have been socked. We felt that that would be too onerous a penalty to pay, and therefore, let's think that through a little bit more before we pass such a bylaw. Another problem had to do with the appeal process. A non-criminal violation of a bylaw under state law is to be appealed at the district court level. You go to the clerk of courts, and the clerk will hear you and in many cases dismiss the charge. But this bylaw calls for a local hearing before the enforcing authority, and that seemed, at least to my co-author of the original article, Marty Rosenthal, an attorney, that degree of ambiguity is not appropriate to have in the bylaw. People ought to know, where do they appeal? If they appeal one place, does that preclude being able to go to a different place? Let's clarify that. Related to that, you may know that there are 4 different town agencies which enforce the bylaw now. There's the DPW, the police, the health department, and the building department. The town is divided into 4 sections. And the level of enforcement varies from one department to another, depending on their attitudes, but also their capabilities, and also the appeals might very well vary. And we feel that if you're going to have a local level appeal, there should be some uniformity, so that somebody in Coolidge Corner has the same likelihood or not likelihood of having his or her ticket appealed as somebody who lives in Washington Square or who lives near Putterham Circle. So there are kinks that should be worked out and can be worked out. But what's important, I think, for the coming winter is to have something in place which will update the fines to make them a reasonable level, to be a real disincentive for people to evade their responsibility to clear their sidewalks, and then also to let the Commissioner of Public Works be allowed to hold off on enforcement when situations warrant, to let everybody know about that so that we're all playing by the same rules on the same page. I think those are innocuous enough to be able to be adopted. There are a couple of minor housekeeping things as well, making sure that the health department can enforce at the same level as the other departments. That's just really housekeeping, not substantive. But these other things I mentioned, I trust will be non-controversial, beneficial to the town, to help keep the town walkable and safe for pedestrians in both commercial and residential areas. And we can wait until the rest of the bylaw changes are fleshed out better, thought through maybe a little bit more, and see what might come up for the fall town meeting. So, that's it.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Great.
Here's a question.
We have a question.
Yes, I'm Carol from Precinct 10. I wanted to ask Stanley about the part of the changing of this where commercial people would be given extended time if there is a bad snowstorm. I guess my question is, if a commercial area the snow isn't bad enough to keep them from opening, then if they open their doors, then they should be responsible for clearing the sidewalks, so that people who are going to come and spend their money in these stores that they have opened should not have to be in danger of life and limb.
Well, that's certainly the case, and the only reason for this provision is there are some times when even the governor says you can't travel. This granting of a waiver of a day or so would only be in cases where travel is so difficult that store owners wouldn't be in to open their stores. It's only under those extreme conditions that such a waiver would be granted. At least that's the intent, and that's how it was written in the bylaw to begin with. By the way, I should tip the hat to Frank Caro for his important role in bringing this whole matter before town meeting. Were you involved in it too, Carol? I know Frank very much was.
Well,
I'm sure you were with him on it.
Yes.
As we all are. I mean.
And I still have another point or two I want to make. I'm very much discouraged by the idea of not enforcing the fines, especially for egregious offenders year after year after year. I mean, I have made complaints about a business owner who has never shoveled his sidewalk year after year after year, and nothing is done. And I think that, I think we have to enforce the bylaw. And
Carol, warnings are only for residentials, not for businesses.
No, you said that.
If I said it, I misspoke.
Yeah, you did. You said if somebody was a constant offender, they should still get a warning.
We're talking about only residential. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear.
No, you didn't.
This is not available to either businesses or to multifamily buildings who have staff to take care of the property. This was only meant for residential homeowners, and I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear.
Okay.
That's the only.
But I still think that they should be fined immediately, too.
The residential homeowner?
Yes.
Well, that was controversial, and I won't comment. My own sense is a little different, but that's a fair point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? That being said, our evening is closed. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
Nice to see you again, Stanley.
Thank you.
You've been a regular.